All right, what you're listening to is the Kurzweil KSP8 processing this little bit of music here. The Kurzweil KSP8 is even getting rid of those drums. Yeah. All right, thank you so much for joining me here today, you guys. If you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. So today I wanted to give a review of the Kurzweil KSP8. I'm going to try to go through this as best as I can in a short amount of time. The truth is there is so much to this unit from Kurzweil that really a thorough review would take hours and hours. So we don't want to do that. I want to keep your attention. So I'm going to go through it really quickly, and hopefully you'll see the power of something like this Kurzweil KSP8. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and look down over here at the Kurzweil KSP8. And of course, there's the main screen. I love this because it gets me away from the computer. And what I have to do is exit out of here and tell you about the topmost level. As you know, with computers and, lots of little folders, there's always a little hierarchy of stuff. And the topmost level in the KSP8 is something called the Studio. The Studio is not just all the effects saved up, but it's all the routing, because there's a lot of kick-ass routing you can do over here. So let's take a look at, obviously I had to store something here. Oops, no, don't save that. All right, here we go. I'm going to just start here with stereo in and out. So you can save studios for different things. Perhaps you want to save a studio setup for a live performance, maybe for a tracking session, maybe for a mix session. You would have a different layout for whatever it is you want. Over here, looking at the screen, you can see that here is 4 stereo in and 4 stereo effects. Now, I also got to mention that you'll see up here it says multi-bus signal processor. The KSP8 allows 4 stereo effects buses or 8 mono effects buses and anything in between. So here they have 4 stereo in and 4 stereo out effects buses. And you can see here's the effects buses here, effects bus 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So there's 4 stereo buses, and here's the buttons to access them here. Look at this one, 8 mono in, 8 mono effects out. So here you actually have 8 mono buses. And like I said, you can combine them all. You can have like 2 stereo effects buses and 4 mono buses, whatever works for you. So here's all the factory settings here. But what I want you to see is right here. Here is my studio that I set up specifically for this video. So the routing and everything was specifically for this video. So you can see it's called YT Vid. And in this studio, of course, it's not just the routing. You have the effects buses. So look at here. Effects bus 1 and 2, it shows you these little blocks, so it shows you how big the effects are. So here's approximately the size of that. You can see this is much bigger, containing a lot of little blocks. I mean, there's a lot going on this effects bus. And here's one big block. And here, there's practically nothing there because I don't have any effects on there. So how do you access these effects buses? You can simply press the effects bus button underneath. And let's look at the effects I used in that song you just heard. Effects Bus 1 and 2 is a preset that I made up called Drum Modulator. And up here is the algorithm. It's a ring modulation algorithm. So why don't we listen to that really quick? So there is the drums with this drum modulator. You can hear that funky ring modulation, especially on the kick drum. Yeah, super fun. That is the drum modulator. And effects bus number 3 and 4 is called Angry Rotors. So it's a rotary simulation. What you can see that's different here. The drum modulator was a preset, which means one algorithm. This Angry Rotors, which is a factory preset, is something called a chain, where they've taken all these algorithms and they've put them together in series. You can see there's a phaser combined with another phaser, combined with some distortion, combined with the rotary effect to get this thing called Angry Rotors. And let's listen to that really quick. I put it on some dirty guitar. Yeah, check it out. Yeah, and there's also a little bit of reverb in there. But there it is. That's the dry track without the effect. Doesn't sound very exciting. Let me bring the KSP8 effects back. Yeah. All right, just wonderful sounding. And then last over here, I have something called medium warm plate. So that is an overall reverb for the mix. Let me go ahead and play the track again with the reverb, and then I'll bring the reverb out. So here it is with the reverb. All right, this is the plate reverb. And let me get rid of that reverb. Okay, very subtle. Let me bring it back in. Now there's just a little bit of space. Let me turn up the reverb so you can really hear it. Let me get rid of the reverb. Bring it back in. Yeah. Okay. There we go. What I love, and hopefully this translates to what you're hearing. What it did is what you want a reverb to do. It took the whole mix and pushed it back in the mix. But you notice that reverb never got intrusive. It just sat in there nicely. So these reverbs are fantastic. And last but not least, on effects 7 and 8, like I told you, I put nothing on there. So this is why it says none. We're going to go back over to the studio. So you access the effects bus here. So you have a master section here, which gives you the I/O configuration, how this thing is going to be clocked. You see it says digital format AES and option AES. I didn't tell you, but I have this all connected digitally through AES EBU. So I have 8 channels or 4 stereo channels going on. Right now I have it all in stereo for those stereo effects. And the other thing I wanted you to see was the configuration. So let's talk about that. You've seen the effects, but how does the KSP8 route all my tracks, the drums, the guitars, bass, and route them in to the KSP8? Let's look at config. You can choose it here. You see all my selections here are called option AES, one left, one right, blah, 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 because I'm using an option card that is an AES EBU card. So I am not using TRS cables to connect. This is all digital. You can select the in level if you're using analog, which I'm not, so this doesn't matter. And then you set up the stereo and mono configurations here. And then the output select, which is important because maybe we'll get to it. You can select how you're going to output this. Are you going to output it post the effects bus? But you can do some weird stuff like pre-effects, like give the output before the effects, which is pretty awesome, and we're going to get to that in a minute. None, post effects. There's also a mix, which we'll also talk about. Right now, everything is post effects. Okay, and then of course the out level, which again doesn't really matter that much to me because I'm not messing with that too much. I'll see if I have time to get to the FX mod. Like I told you, this is really deep. But the effects mod is the reason how I was able to take the drums in and out, actually. Okay. The other thing I also want to mention is the effects buses. I want to show you something really quick with the effects buses. Notice right here it says mix mode and it says insert. So I use this drum modulator with the drums as an insert with a wet dry parameter. So 39% wets because I felt the drum modulator, that ring modulator was a little overbearing. So I brought it down to give just enough to have it interesting. So you can do that. Set it up as an insert with your own little wet dry knob here. The other thing here is the angry rotors. It says send return. That means it's 100% wet, or as you pedal aficionados like to say, kill dry. So it's 100% wet, and I have that sent on an auxiliary send on a mixer. In this case, I'm using a Metric Halo ULN8 interface, and it has Metric Halo has its own little digital mixer in there, so I'm using that kind of like an outboard mixer. So with an auxiliary send, my guitar comes in, an auxiliary send is going to the KSP8 and then being mixed back in, much like you would use a regular mixer. And the same thing here for the medium warm plate. It's just like sending up an auxiliary send in your DAW or whatever. I'm just putting in there, it's 100% wet. Okay, so we saw the configuration. Now let's look at the routing. This is where I really thought the KSP8 does something very unusual and cool. Take a look over here. It says input 1 and 2. Now, if you remember, in 1 and 2 is my drums. Okay, how do we know that? Take a look at the effects bus 1 and 2. And I have my inputs going into effects 1 and 2, the drums. So the drums go on in 1 and 2. And now there's these blocks. So this isn't getting to the effects. This is just the input into the KSP8. And right now I have them set to none. But check this out, what I can do. You can insert some EQ, a low shelf, parametric. I'm not going to go through all of them because as I scroll through, you can see there's a ton. Band pass, notch filters, all sorts of crazy stuff. As far as EQ, this is before you even get to the effect. So in a sense, what you're doing is you're shaping the timbre of your effect before you even adjust any parameters. You can adjust the input EQ, which is really cool. You could even do this. Distulator, which is a little distortion effect. You can see there's a drive and a mix knob. So you can even make things a little more crunchy and vintage if you want that way. This is before you even process the effect. And then after that, there's something called a shaper, which is I find more effective when it comes to synths rather than guitar. And shaper has to be a different video about shaper. That is a Kurzweil vast thing, which is really cool, actually. And then look at this. Look what they did. You hear that? A sawtooth, a sine wave. I mean, right? Just nuts that there is a sine plus a shaper noise. So there's all this cool stuff going on, and then you have another block to do that. So if you wanted to, you can have a parametric with some sort of notch filter. So you have 2 stages of EQ before you even go to the effects. So honestly, that is nuts. You can come up with some amazing sounds that way. All right, so we haven't gotten to the effects yet. So you can shape it here with 2 blocks of EQ and shaper distortion. Now, after that, it gets sent to the effects. Look at this, EQ 1 and 2, because it's telling you those first stages of EQ. The output of that is now, I'm going to send it to the effects. It says here effects 1 and 2. Remember, this is the drums. So the drums come into effects 1 and 2, which is the drum modulator. But look at this. You could even send it to another effect in parallel, which I did not do. But if I wanted to, I could have sent my drums to that drum modulator and to those angry rotors at the same time, and then mix the two. And more angry rotors, less drum modulator, more drum modulator, less angry rotors. You can do this crazy stuff. I think that's just so cool that you can do it. So the routing is pretty important to come up with some really unusual and neat sounds, I think. And you can see here's everything you need to balance those two. Okay, so I didn't use it here. I just wanted one thing at a time. And you can use these buttons to go through. Here's my guitar, my dirty guitar coming in and going to effects 3 and 4, which is those angry rotors. Again, I didn't choose anything here. effects 5 and 6, that's my reverb, and 7 and 8 you should, it doesn't really matter because I chose nothing, so I'm not even routing anything here to it. Okay, fantastic. So now we've gotten to that little bit of it. Let's take a look at the rest of it. I think you've got a pretty good idea. The rest of it here, metering. Kurzweil does something really interesting. They don't put the metering right in front of your face, and I think that's a good thing because I don't necessarily want real estate taken up just to show me all the metering. Although I do love to see the meters go up and down. I don't know if you do. I kind of like that sometimes. But they've kept it right out of the way. They've only kept the important bit. And I'm going to show you what it is. I'm going to play the track again, and I'm going to show you the metering. All right, here we go. All right, so here's the metering. Effects bus 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6. This is the input, the tracks coming into the KSP8. Then here's the pre-effects. This is after, let me go ahead and stop that. So this is the metering after those EQ stages, because remember, when you do EQ or even distortion, you can make things louder, and you can even there's even a resonance control on the low pass filter. So you can really jack that up and overload the input into the effects, which isn't a good thing in these digital systems. So you have a pre-effects. Also take a look at this. This is basically showing you the metering. It's turning that amber orangish color, sorry, I should say more orangish color. The green is good. The orange is still good. It's just letting you know, hey, we're getting close to that limit. And this is for the pre-effect stage. I can also hold this down, and there's my meters right there. Show me everything I need to see right there if I really want it. Here's after the effects processing, and here's the actual output of the KSP8. Okay, so there's our metering. Fantastic. You can adjust the contrast here. If I want to do any adjustments, I can do this with the quick mode for the drum modulator, and all that is 8 specifically selected parameters to adjust really quickly, hence the term quick mode, because there's a lot of parameters for this drum modulator. So you can select, this is user selectable, the what you want to go ahead and tweak. If that's not good enough for you, of course, you can hit the edit button, and that shows you 3 pages of parameters. And so this is everything available to you, and you can see there's a lot over there to adjust. Fortunately, you can go ahead and use the quick mode to, set that up yourself for the things you tweak the most. So very user customizable. There's also some other things here I should show you, such as mods or really modulators. So it's a way of assigning controls, LFOs, ADSR envelopes, MIDI commands to go ahead and adjust a lot of parameters. There's chain modifiers, studio mods. So that's what I did with the drums. I ran the drums in through the Kurzweil KSP8 as an insert, but what I did on the output of the KSP8 is I assigned a mod wheel that's on my keyboard that you can't see, and I can adjust the drum output actually of the KSP8 with the mod wheel. So I got kind of faded it out. Really neat. I mean, it's very interesting, creative ways you can manipulate music using something like this. I love that. So the modifiers, before I get to the rest of this, I just want to tell you one thing. There is something about the modifiers in Kurzweil. Those engineers are nuts, and probably because Ray Kurzweil, to a certain extent, is just a genius, nuts. I'm not going to go into the modifiers. Let me just say that it puts any plug-in and most hardware, except for Eventide, it puts those to shame. There's so many LFOs. It's not like 1, 2, or 3, or 4. There's so many LFOs and ways to tweak them, and you can frequency modulate LFOs. There's these ADSR envelopes, And then if that's, and MIDI commands to be modifiers, and if that's still not enough, then they have something that they call funs, which is short for functions. And these do math functions, and it is insane because you can start putting these LFOs and other numbers, and you can multiply and add, subtract, divide, do all sorts of things. It's maddening, and all that, and you can use the output of those to control certain parameters. And again, I won't get into it, but I just want you to know, in terms of modifiers and creativity, it beats really anything out there except the Eventide. The Eventide's, big rack Eventides are about the only thing that I know that is comparable with these kinds of modifiers. Plugins never come close. All right, my friends, so let's go ahead and look. So we see that we can get configs. We talked about all of this. You've got a row of soft buttons here at the bottom. And, of course, here's the modifiers, the LFOs, ASRs, and there's the functions. Yeah, you can set them up here. I'm not going to go into this too much, assign or plus sign, which I forgot what that was, square wave plus square triangle, and rise and fall, and 3-step, 4-step, which I'm not going to get into here, even though I do know what they are. You can see the modifiers. It's nuts, which is a good thing. Over here, you've got a bypass button. Of course, to bypass, this bypasses the whole entire KSP8. Another option you have is you can change the bypass button to, for example, bypass just effects bus 1 and 2, but keep the other effects buses going. Right now, I have it set up that you bypass the whole Kurzweil KSP8. There's also a compare button, so when you're tweaking things, you can compare what the preset was like before and after. Very cool. There's the store button, so you can store your studio or your presets. I do have to say that's one thing that was a little confusing. It took me some time to figure out what I'm really trying to save, whether I'm trying to save the entire studio with the preset or I just want to save the preset. And that took me a little while to figure out, but nevertheless, my brain got over it. And last button here is tempo, which you can adjust either with the wheel here, the encoder. The other thing you can do is use that number pad, which I love. So instead of, if for example I want this to say 110, instead of going like this, oops, there. So instead of doing that, I can simply go here, type in 110, enter, and there you go. Now it's done. And you can, when you're saving things, you can also go ahead and type in the name or use the little jog wheel to set the name. A little time consuming. We're spoiled now with computers. We just type new names for presets on our keyboard. So this is a little time consuming, but this thing is 20 years old. That's the way it worked. There's also increment and decrement buttons, and then as you saw, I can use these right here to go ahead and let me go ahead and replace that. You can go through things using the jog wheel or this right here. Yeah, so you can use those buttons over here. All right, that in short is the Kurzweil KSP8. So let's talk about pros and cons, and I'll start with the cons. The first con is the processing power, but remember this is a 20-year-old product, so the processing power compared to today's rack-mounted effects processors like Axe FX and Eventide H9000, this thing doesn't even come close to those. Of course, time marches on. So there are some little, like really mega chains that take up a lot of processing power that I can't play with the way I've got it configured right now because my preset's already taken up too much of the processing space. So the other thing is that I found a couple bugs. They're not the end of the world, but just so you know, there's some bugs, and most of you may not even find these bugs. I found them. Okay. And the other thing is it only operates at 48 kilohertz. So if you operate in 96 kilohertz or 192, that's how you deal with things. Then you will need some sort of sample rate conversion, or just use the analog in and out. Then it won't matter. That's it for the cons. The pros. No computers involved. This was amazing. I was so focused while making this video on that screen. It was just a relief not to look at a computer screen. That is a huge bonus. The other pro is the routing. The routing on here to route to different effects, things in parallel, I thought was just amazing and so cool. I love that. And then having the EQ on the inputs that you can change the timbre of your effects with a little bit of distortion, with these shapers, with these like 20 or 25 different types of EQ. Just nuts. I thought that was just so cool. The algorithms are incredible. There's not a lot of emulation that they're trying to emulate other pieces of hardware. There's very little of that, and which I love because it really allows you this space to come up with your own little effect as long as you understand how effects and routing work. So I love it. You're not going to find a Dynacomp compressor. You're not going to find an 1176. You're not going to find an Electric Mistress type of flange or an old Boss chorus. You don't have any of that stuff. You have just very cool and exciting sounding effects. You have chorus, flange, delay, reverb, all these sorts of things. The other con is that there is no pitch shifting effect. I forgot. No pitch shifting. So, you know, I can mention that towards the end of the video, but no pitch shifting. The other thing is the kick-ass modulation. Holy crap, as I just talked about, the LFOs, ASRs, the funds. My God, you could be here for years experimenting with this. The factory presets is another pro. Why do I say that? Because the factory presets are incredible as they are. Normally, the factory presets on a lot of gear sucks to use in a musical context. It's just there to really show off the effects. But in this case, what they made is literally usable out of the box when recording and processing your music. I was pretty stunned at how usable the presets were. I didn't have to do a lot of tweaking or no tweaking just to get something that was usable. All right, let's talk about today's equivalent, something to compare to today. For the most part, I don't want to bother with plugins. Plugins, that's something separate. Let's just talk about apples to apples, hardware to hardware. What's comparable that I can find is the AXFX3. So it's really just those two units. The Eventide is infamous. It's going to, at least in terms of processing power and amount of effects and algorithms and the ability to even create and change the algorithms, that's something that the Kurzweil KSP8 can't do. However, I think the Kurzweil still holds its own against an Eventide H8000 or an H9000 because those shapers are very unique, and there's some other algorithms that I found to be very unusual and unique. So I think it still has a place in a studio next to a big Eventide. The AXFX3 is almost similar, but the AXFX3 guitar amp emulation aside, mostly everything there is about, emulating famous effects. So you can have your Electric Mistress with your Marshall, Plexi with a 4x12 with greenbacks, or a Mesa Recto cab with your Plexi, with the Electric Mistress, and then, some infamous delay unit, a Benson Echo Rec in the loop. That's fine and good. It's just different. It's just apples and oranges. Like I said before, what I like is that with the Kurzweil KSP8 still has a place even alongside something like an AXFX3, because the algorithms, some of them are very unusual, and they do allow you that room to come up with your own little unique thing. I just think that's spectacular, and so it really holds its own. Oh, and one more thing I got to say is, even though the processor on the KSP8 is 20 years old, and so compared to a modern unit like the Eventide H9000 or the AXFX3, it may seem underpowered, so it's not going to be as good. No. It's about the code that runs underneath it. And those engineers at Kurzweil really knew what they're doing. So these sounds, even if the processor is underpowered by today's standards, it doesn't matter. How does it sound? And it sounds incredible. It doesn't sound dated, and that's very special. This unit does not sound dated. It still has very modern and unique sound, so it has its place 20 years later. That's incredible to me. Finally, let's just get on to updates. If it was possible to update the KSP8 to something more modern, obviously a bigger processor, but not necessarily more algorithms. I would recommend maybe a pitch shifting algorithm, but do a Kurzweil version of pitch shifting. Don't match what everyone else has done. Do your thing. You guys have something special in your crazy ass minds. And the bigger processor, I feel, is important, so I could put more effects. So, for example, if I wanted this monstrous effect that would take up all the processing power of the current KSP8 right now, I want to still be able to have some chorus on flange on other buses that I could use. And a bigger processor will be able to do all of that stuff. The other thing is just to be able to operate in 96, maybe 192 kilohertz. It's arguable whether the unit would sound better that way, but, that sort of thing. Just if you want to do it digital, that you can easily incorporate this without any sample rate changes or anything like that. A touch screen, a color screen, maybe a computer editor. Oh, and of course have the modern things, a USB or Thunderbolt, or maybe even an Ethernet output connection to the computer. I don't know about a computer editor. It's certainly nice. What I really love about the KSP8 is that it took my eyes off the computer monitor and into this, because, all of us all day long are looking at our phones and our computers, laptops. I mean, you're watching this either on your phone or your laptop or your computer monitor. It was so nice to get to work and look at this tiny little screen because that really allowed me to focus, and I love that. All right, my friends, that's it. That's my quick review, although it looks like it's about 35 minutes long. That's my 35-minute quick review on the Kurzweil KSP8. I hope you enjoyed that and learned something about this unit. Very, very hard to find out there, but if you do, I highly recommend you snatch that up and explore it yourself. I can guarantee you, if you're willing to dig in, you won't get rid of this thing. It will still come up with wonderful modern sounds that are just as good as anything out there right now. Thanks again so much, you guys. I appreciate all of you that subscribe and support this channel. If you haven't subscribed, please hit that subscribe button and hit that notification bell, and I will see you guys real soon.